Doesn't matter. All right. 6 seconds and you're on.
Today is March 5th, 2011. My name is Marty Dick, and I'm interviewing Doug Young, who was involved in the Fourmile Canyon fire on Labor Day and the 6th of September, 2011. This interview is being recorded for the Maria Rogers Oral History Program, and it's being filmed by Don Dick. Doug, I understand that you are and have been a resident of Sunshine Canyon for quite a number of years.
Yes, thank you, Marty. That's right, my name is Doug Young, and I moved to Sunshine Canyon in January of 1990. I live at 79 Eagles Drive, which is approximately 2 miles up Sunshine Canyon, which is approximately 2 miles west of the city of Boulder, city limits. So we live about 2 miles west up Sunshine Canyon in unincorporated Boulder County. Mm-hmm. And with relation to the fire that we'll be discussing, we were a few miles due east of the point of origin of the fire, and then as the fire spread, we were east and I guess southeast of the fire. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A little more about myself. Let's see. I moved in January of 1990. I married my wife Pam in October of 1991. I joined the Sunshine Fire Protection District in 1990, and I was chief of the Sunshine Fire Protection District from 1993 to 1995. My wife and I had 3 children, and I was very active in the Sunshine Fire Department. As I said, I was chief from 93 to 95, and then for about the next 10 years, I was very active as a battalion chief and helping run and plan parts of the department. In October 2006, our oldest son, Davis, died, and as a result, I started to retire from the fire department. So I'm now fully retired from active firefighting. But as part of being a firefighter in the late 90s, I did create and implement a master plan for the fire protection district. So after I was fire chief, I realized that we needed some long-term strategic planning. So we put together a long-term master plan, which we were able to pass a mill levy, and we were able to fund the plan. And as a result, we were able to acquire some modern fire apparatus, and we were also able to plan and construct our new fire station, Station 2. And both of those, I'm very proud to say, were able to be utilized on this recent Fourmile fire. So I'm very proud that our many years of planning really seemed to pay off in this case.
I can certainly see why you would feel that way. So that when did you first hear about the fire?
September 6th. Monday, September 6th was Labor Day, so the kids were home from school, so it was a day off. And I had just made a nice breakfast at home, and we were lounging around. And then at right around 10 o'clock, shortly after 10 o'clock, my wife and I heard a siren going up Sunshine Canyon. And with years and years of fire department experience, when we hear a siren, we know something must be going on. So we immediately started listening to the radio traffic on our scanner and heard that there was a small fire that had started in the Emerson Gulch in Fourmile Canyon. By the time we flipped on the scanner, the radio traffic was urgent and complex and confused, but it was very clear that a very serious situation was unfolding. And I have a few notes here. by the time we had flipped on the scanner, at 10:10, that's 10 minutes after 10 a.m., an urgent call went out that they had a fully involved fire, trees torching, get Gold Hill fire out now. Because I think at that point they knew they were going to have a fire that was going to run very rapidly up the hill towards Gold Hill. And then just a mere 5 minutes later, by 10:15, they were toning out all the fire departments, and somebody came on the radio and said, "I've got crowning," which means the fire is up in the crowns of the trees and is actually traveling from crown to crown. So shortly after we flipped on the radio, we could tell we had a very, very serious fire developing, even though it was still many, many miles away from where we lived.
Well, too.
Yeah, it was several miles away, and we didn't, at that point, we didn't think it was going to directly affect us. But then we sort of kept an eye on it, and we walked down to the end of our road, end of Eagles Drive, to where Eagles Drive meets Sunshine Canyon Drive, and we had a clear view of the point of origin of the fire. And we could clearly see the fire several miles away, and it was very clear that the fire was growing very rapidly. And the way I would describe it is it looked like a head of cauliflower. You had, this was not a few wisps of smoke, you had a head of cauliflower, this dark, roiling smoke, and it was growing very rapidly. So at that point, based on our experience in the area, we started to monitor it pretty carefully, both on the radio and then by frequently checking on the status of the fire. And I guess I'll just continue to describe from there. We continued to walk down to the end of our road, and by 11 o'clock we could tell we had a very serious situation on our hands. So at 11:06 I sent out my first email to all of my friends and neighbors, and I explained, I said, "Dear neighbors," and this is to my neighbors who live in my neighborhood in Lower Sunshine Canyon. I sent it out to our neighborhood email list. I said, "Dear neighbors, you should know that this fire has started. It's several miles away, but Gold Hill is threatened. They're being evacuated. All county resources have been dispatched." So it's a full county-wide response. But our specific community is not threatened or evacuated at this time. Now this is at 11:06. This is approximately an hour after we first became aware of the fire. The firefighters were dispatched at 10:01 a.m. and so at 11:06, I tried to give as much accurate, comprehensive information to my neighbors as possible. We continued to monitor the fire, and I started to take pictures of the fire at that point, and it had grown pretty large. And my first Facebook post was at 11:18, when I basically echoed what I had sent to my neighbors. And I posted that there was this fire growing, and I posted some photos of it. At 11:45, I sent out a follow-on email, and I said, "Dear neighbors, the fire has gotten much, much worse. There's a smoke column arcing overhead." It was directly arcing overhead, which means that the wind was blowing towards us from the fire. There was
and
a huge...
how fast was that wind, Doug, do you know?
You know, that's a good question, Marty, and I don't know exactly. I would describe the wind, the surface level winds, as kind of blustery. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the 20-foot winds were, or the winds aloft, but the winds aloft were strong, steady, and sustained. So enough so that we had this deep orange column arcing overhead. And at that point we had ash falling in our neighborhood. And so in my email I said, "Folks, there's this smoke column arcing overhead. That is a watch out situation. We have ash falling in our neighborhood, which means that irrespective of how far away the fire itself is, we could easily wind up with spotting and spot fires in our neighborhood. So at 11:45, and again, this is just about an hour and 45 minutes after people were dispatched to the fire, I told my neighbors, I said, I know you're all having a nice comfy day at home, but I'd strongly recommend that you stop whatever you're doing and you slowly start getting dressed, putting things away, and preparing yourself in the event we are evacuated. I didn't tell anybody to evacuate, but I wanted to get people mentally prepared that this was no longer business as usual and that something very, very serious was going on. And I guess I should also point out at that point, we were in close contact with some good friends of ours, the Waltman Wongs. Steve and Felicity Waltman live at 1441 County Road 83, which is in the Sunshine Fire Protection District. And it was directly north of the fire. And Steve Waltman has been a firefighter for many, many years, and he was one of the first firefighters to respond. So he ran out his door Monday morning to respond. And about an hour later, he called his wife Felicity and said, "This is a big one. It's going to be bad. Get out now." So before there was any official notice or evacuation, Felicity Waltman had to evacuate her 2 daughters and their animals, their cats. And so they evacuated to our house at about noon on Monday. So it was very clear that we had a very, very serious event that was starting to unfold extremely, extremely rapidly. And I should also point out that we were regularly checking on the status of the fire, and one thing that struck us was that it was clear that there was some really extreme fire behavior. And what I mean by extreme fire behavior was that the fire was exhibiting incomplete combustion. It was burning so rapidly. We had thick, black, yellow smoke. You could see in and around the fire, you could see fire whirls developing. You could see these things spinning off. Extreme fire growth, moving extremely rapidly. We'd be looking at the side of a mountain, and minutes later, it would be completely engulfed. And from years and years of training and safety and everything we learn as wildland firefighters, all of our alarms were going off. So we knew this was serious. So we were taking it very seriously. And that made an impression on everybody. Our whole family took it very, very seriously.
And what did you as a firefighter decide to do at this point?
That's an excellent question. As a former firefighter, unfortunately, my firefighter nerve was twitching at this point. But even though I wasn't an active firefighter, what I did do was I still had my firefighter clothing. I had my Nomex gear. So just to protect my own home, I changed into my firefighter protective equipment, if only for the purpose of preparing my house for evacuation, because we wanted to prep the house. We wanted to go through the checklist of what you should do to prepare your house in the face of an advancing fire. So I wanted to have my protective equipment on. So that's a good point. By noon on Monday, we were in defensive mode. I was in my protective gear, and we were starting to identify what we were going to evacuate and what we were going to load into the car and take with us. And then we went around the house. We prepared the house. We cleared flammables away from the house. We started preparing the inside of the house. We drew the curtains. Yeah, like I said, we got the flammables and the wood away from the house.
And how did you leave the house? Or did you leave windows and doors locked and closed, or did you?
Right. We closed all the doors. Although I'm embarrassed to say I did make one pretty major blunder, which was I left the garage door open because I wanted to give firefighters access to the garage and to my tools, which is a pretty serious blunder. I should have closed the garage door. I was just anxious that if they cut power, they wouldn't be able to gain access to the garage. But we closed all the doors and windows, drew all the curtains, but we did leave all the doors unlocked. And as I said, I left the garage open. But what we also did was we took a big piece of cardboard and we wrote a message to the firefighters saying, "Dear firefighters, family of 4 plus dog, evacuated, we're safe." We may have even put our phone number on there, I can't remember. But what we also do is, since we have a large residential cistern for drinking water, I took a can of red spray paint and I drew a big arrow to where the cistern of 1,000 gallons of water was. And I wrote 1,000 gallons of water here. So in the event they needed to set up at our house, and in the event they needed water, and in the event they had a submersible pump that they could, or a floating pump that they could pump out of there, we wanted to make sure that was available to them as well. So we'd practiced this once or twice before. So we wanted to leave the house in a state where if a firefighter drove up, they would have all the information they needed to know. House has been prepped, people have evacuated. We left garden hoses out. We strung the garden hoses, we hooked them up, which of course only works as long as you have power, but fortunately we never lost power at our house. So we had strung garden hoses around the house as well. So that was a good point. And my family finally evacuated, excuse me as I shuffle my papers, I think they evacuated at 5:30 that afternoon. That's when my wife Pam and my 2 kids and the dog finally left. And then I evacuated about an hour later. I was actually waiting, since I sort of felt responsible for everybody in my neighborhood, I was waiting for the last person to get out, and then I was going to mark their driveway as evacuated. So I kind of wanted to be the last one out and make sure everybody else got out safely.
How'd you mark their driveways?
We had police tape, and we were tying that on the mailbox or onto the phone pole or leaving some other indication. So firefighters cleared all the houses in Sunshine where people had already left, and then in the few cases where they hadn't left, when I left, we tied some additional tape on there, cleared the houses, and then at the end of the road we tied tape on the mailboxes to indicate that those people had evacuated. We tried to give as many indications as possible. You know, and we had firefighters come through at least 2 or 3 times, making sure people were evacuated, just double and triple checking, because at that point it was very much still at risk.
Where was the fire then?
By then, the fire spread very rapidly. Our impression was, after it started, it spread very rapidly up Sugarloaf Mountain, and then also up the other side of the valley, up towards Gold Hill. And it was really the flame front that ran up towards Gold Hill that, when the wind shifted, became a huge flame front that blew, that it expanded, I think, in a northward direction, and eventually it reached our canyon, Sunshine Canyon Drive, and eventually across County Road 83, I believe around 3 or 4 p.m. on Monday afternoon. So by the time we evacuated, Pam and I, the fire was on Bald Mountain. And Bald Mountain is about 4.5 miles up Sunshine Canyon Drive. And Monday afternoon, we had seen the heavy air tankers, which were finally able to fly We had seen them dropping slurry on Bald Mountain. So fortunately, they were able to hold the fire at Bald Mountain, but Pam and I could see Bald Mountain very clearly from our driveway. And we had established that as one of our trigger points. We said, Pam, if fire comes over Bald Mountain, that's when we evacuate. Because at that point, we had not gotten any official evacuation, and there was some kind of technical screw up with the reverse 911 system. And although some of the residents in Sunshine had gotten the original evacuation order via telephone, but those of us who lived in the larger area, we did not get our evacuation call until I think it was around 5 or 5:30 that evening. And in fact, I have 2 phone lines. My second phone line, I didn't even get that call until later that evening. So in other words, by the time we got the phone call to evacuate, we had been convinced for hours that we were going to need to evacuate. And so...
Had you been using cell phone then? Or your house phone was working so that you could stay in contact with people?
We were very fortunate in that we never lost power or internet or phone service. So in fact, for the duration of the entire fire, we had power. It's because where we live in Lower Sunshine Canyon has a different utility feed from Upper Sunshine Canyon. So we were very lucky in that they'd never had to cut power for safety, and nor were the power lines affected by the fire. So we had power, which was great. We had internet. We were able to keep people apprised. We were a mini communication hub that people were able to call us, and we had 2 phone lines so we could call out, and we got a lot of questions. That's one of the hardest things, maybe you recall this as well, one of the hardest things to deal with when you're facing something like that is that suddenly everybody is calling you, asking you how you are. Are you okay? Do you need a place to stay? Which is really wonderful, but it was almost unmanageable, all the phone calls and emails and Facebook posts asking if we were okay. So in a way, that's why Facebook was nice. I could just say, we are okay, thanks. And we could send out one email saying, we are okay, thanks, which helped a little, I think.
And I believe you also tried to contact a nearby homeowner who was out of the country.
That's right. Our next door neighbor, who lives on the hill above our house. In fact, his driveway was an excellent vantage point for watching the advancing fire. And they had been out of town traveling on vacation with some other neighbors, and there was a house sitter at their house. And I don't think their house sitter had bargained for this at all. And we hadn't gotten official notice yet at all, but when we saw the house sitter driving in and out, we said, hey, you should know what's going on. This is what we're planning to do. The rest of the neighborhood is doing this. You should be aware of it. And she was very, very grateful. And I think she had her own pets as well as our neighbors' pets to take care of. And so we exchanged contact information with her. And eventually, I wanted to get through to my neighbor who was on vacation, so eventually I got through to his cell phone and reached him on vacation. So he was somewhere comfortable, somewhere having a great time. They were planning to be home for a few days. And I said, but did you hear about the big fire? And he said, yeah, my house sitter told me about it. She told me where it was, and it's miles away, so I'm not worried. And I said, well, do you realize it's spread? Do you realize there's fire coming over Bald Mountain? Do you realize that we're being evacuated and that it is really a very, very clear and present danger? And he hadn't been quite aware of the gravity of the situation because I don't think the house sitter had been able to articulate it. So we brought him up to speed. And so we were able to evacuate his house sitter, get her to a good place in town, and to secure his house. But also, since he has a gated property, I arranged with him to, he gave me details on how to leave the gate open, because if fire had spread to our area, it would have been vital firefighter access. So we were able to leave all the gates open so that people could access it if necessary. We have another neighbor with gated access as well, and so I made sure to leave their gates open as well.
So Whittemeyers have you to be thankful for.
Fortunately, we weren't threatened by fire, but it worked out great.
So you moved with your family to Boulder, wondering, of course, what was going on up there. You spent the night in Boulder, if I recall. Then what happened? Tuesday morning you woke up and... Or maybe Monday night you
Tuesday
were
morning,
watching...
So I'll start by saying Monday evening.
Good, thank you.
We evacuated to Boulder, and we just called some friends up and said, we're coming over. I don't know if I imagined it in my mind that they had offered their house, but for some reason I said, we're showing up. And they were wonderful. And so my wife evacuated with the 2 kids and the dog. And on her way out of our neighborhood, the road was roadblocked. This was at 5:30, so it had probably been roadblocked by now for 5 or 6 hours. So as she was exiting the roadblock, she actually encountered some other good friends of ours who own a second home inside the burn area. And they were greatly concerned about their second home. And they were trying to get up there to rescue their personal belongings, and they weren't being allowed up. And it just so happened that they were best friends with my daughter. So we said, great, now our daughter has a place to spend the night. So she was thrilled. She got to spend the night with her, the rest of the week, in fact, with her good friends. And we evacuated to some good friends in Boulder and spent a couple of nights there. My son spent the week there going to school. So they had friends to go to school with, and that was great. The support from the folks in Boulder was absolutely fabulous. It was really nice to reach out and have that community safety net there for us. So we evacuated to our friend's home Monday night, and eventually I showed up. I evacuated at about 6:30 after I zipped everything else up. I was Facebooking out on my deck saying, gee, the fire is getting bad. There is ash landing on my keyboard. And you know, when ash is landing on your keyboard, that could be an indication that it's time to evacuate. So a little while later, I packed up and left and went to our friend's house, and it was wonderful. They fed us, took care of our dog. It was just, I can't tell you how wonderful it was to be able to evacuate and be so warmly taken care of. So then we wake up Tuesday morning.
Did you have any contact with what was going on Monday night?
Boy, there was so much confusion. We continued to monitor the radio. Mm-hmm. We had radios with us. We were listening to multiple fire channels. But still there was a great deal of confusion. Anytime a fire is growing that rapidly and spreading that rapidly, there's a great deal of confusion, even without the firefighter cadre that's dispatched to the fire. And I could tell the gravity of the situation. Monday afternoon, when our fire department was dispatched to our own fire station, because our fire station was directly, literally, in the line of fire, I knew things had gone very, very badly. So we were in a state of, suspended disbelief at that point. So we knew it was serious. But nighttime fire behavior tends to abate a little bit. And so nighttime tends to be take a shower and then watch the same 30-second newsreels over and over again on all the local channels, which doesn't always do a lot to help you relax. But it's, we're drawn to it like a moth to a flame. So we're watching all the local channels, watching all the slurry bomber drops, watching all the fires, and tragically watching, homes burn that were caught on tape. So that's what our Monday night looked like. It's a miracle we were able to sleep at all, but I think we were just so exhausted, we finally passed out. Mm-hmm. So then Tuesday dawned.
Then Tuesday dawned.
And fortunately, our kids were able to go to school, and our son rode bikes to school. That's something he doesn't get to do normally, living up here in the mountains. So for my son, it's a treat to be able to ride a bike to school with his friends. And at that point, I can't remember, at that point, I had been going to some of the news conferences that were being held at the Incident Command Post. And I think maybe I went to one Tuesday morning. Anyway, Tuesday morning, by that time I had been in touch with many of our neighbors, and there was a great deal of fear and confusion, uncertainty, and there was a general overall lack of really specific and actionable information coming from the official information sources. You know, the fire management had their own public information structure set up, and it was giving a lot of high-level facts, how many firefighters were on the fire, how many acres, things like that. But people really needed actionable information. Is the fire in our neighborhood? Did our house burn? I heard so-and-so's houses burn, and what about the horses? And so really there was a whole vast community that was really suffering for lack of information. And because of my familiarity with the area, and because of my familiarity with years and years, decades of firefighting experience in this area, I made the very personal decision to go up into the fire area and try to gather as much good, detailed information as I could. So I put on all of my firefighter protective gear, and I actually made a plan, and I made a very discreet plan. I ORM'd it, which is operational risk management. I said, okay, Doug, you're going to go up into the fire as a single resource. You're going to be by yourself in your car. And I briefed myself on all the safety details I should find, and I told myself, okay, you're not going to go down any driveways. It's far too dangerous. You're going to drive up, stay on the main roads, and your sole task is to document from the road what houses were still standing and what houses had been destroyed, and just make a note of the time based on whatever you learn. Go as far as you can. Sunshine is a fairly small district, so I was going to go as far as I could up the major roads, and then when I was turned back by fire, or if the road was otherwise impassable, I was just going to turn around. I wasn't going to drive through smoke. I wasn't going to drive through flames. And so that's what I did on Tuesday, and I was able to meet up with the firefighting resources that were up fighting the fire. And it was incredibly dramatic and incredibly devastating. By Tuesday morning, most, but not all, of the damage had taken place. And it was a smoking, still actively burning wasteland. I personally knew many of the firefighting resources that were on the fire that day. And so I was able to make contact with them, find out what was going on. And in some cases, I was able to actually document homes and structures that had not burned, but tragically wound up burning later in the day on Tuesday. And just to digress a bit about fire behavior, this fire exploded on Monday. And the fire behavior from 10 a.m. on Monday to 5 p.m. on Monday was incredible. And then we had the nighttime fire operational period where the fire behavior abated a bit, but I will say it was remarkable how active and hot the fire was Monday night. It didn't bank down nearly as much as we'd like as firefighters, because that's when we catch the fire. But Tuesday dawned, and as Tuesday heated up, the fire behavior started to intensify again. And although the operational period on Tuesday started out lots of, it was still burning actively in many places, the fire behavior really intensified during the Tuesday operational period as well. And not only that, but we had some wind shifts such that fire was able to get into the Sunshine community and burn around, and it actually destroyed many more homes on Tuesday, which was really tragic. one of my impressions from going up there on Tuesday was how few firefighting resources were up there in such an actively burning area. And because of some, resources were scarce, fire management had made some decisions to deploy their resources in other areas. And the Sunshine community, even as a relative outsider, but with an understanding of fire management, it seemed like there weren't anywhere near the resources there should have been in the Sunshine community. And tragically, we did lose more homes that day. And that was very, very hard to come to grips with. So, so I proceeded to drive the roads on Tuesday and meet up with the other firefighters. I've got a few notes. I drove up here 9:45 Tuesday morning and proceeded to visit many of the neighborhoods. I drove up Sunshine Canyon Drive, and then I drove down County Road 83, which is one of the major roads in the neighborhood. Let's see. What I was eventually able to drive all the way to Gold Hill and meet the folks there. I actually went to the Gold Hill station. I met the firefighters there. Many of the firefighters, some of the firefighters were still responding. Some of them had actually been out of the country, and they had just flown in. So many of the Gold Hill firefighters were just arriving at that very moment. So Gold Hill was still kind of mustering their response, and they were getting support from local fire departments. So I made contact with their folks at their fire station, and I stopped in at the Gold Hill Inn, which had been converted to an incident command post, and talked to the folks there to get their plan. One of my secondary goals was I was trying to make sure all the divisions were in contact with each other, and there were some communication hiccups because of radio capabilities and who was monitoring what channels. So I was trying to get everybody on the same page. I was trying to say, hey, this division soup is trying to reach you on this channel, and I was trying to stitch that stuff together because it was a bit sobering that not everybody was in good communication, and I felt at that time it was really important to try to have everybody on the same page. So anyway, that was, I don't know if I helped or not, but that was one of my operational goals. So then I returned back to Sunshine. I actually had lunch at my house. I was able to go to my house, made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, sent some emails, and went back out. One thing I was able to do was that afternoon, one of our firefighting crews was actually fighting a structure fire. Actually, a garage had caught on fire. And this was incredible. They described it to me. They said, Doug, the fire had just crept up to the garage. It was just creeping through the grass, and they didn't think anything was going to come of it. And so they left the house, and they didn't spend any more resources on it. And when they came back, the fire just crept up to the edge of the garage and apparently had gone up the side of the garage. And by the time I was there, they were fighting a fully engulfed garage. The garage was fully engulfed, and they were in defensive mode. They were protecting the house, and they were protecting the surrounding trees. So I brought them some chainsawing resources and made sure they were okay. Gave them some stuff. I guess I gave them fuel and bar oil and a file and some other stuff. So I helped them out. So by then I had compiled the first set of notes. I mean, they were far from complete, but at least I had spanned all the major roads in Sunshine, and I had taken at least a first stab at trying to document, okay, I know for sure these houses are standing. I know for sure these houses are lost. There were still quite a few that were unaccounted for, but that wasn't part of my original plan. So I wound up going back to our Sunshine Station 2, which is at about the 6-mile marker of Sunshine Canyon Drive.
Which is Highway 52.
Highway 52, thank you very much. Which fortunately had been spared by the fire. The fire had directly burned up to and around our station too. But fortunately it was spared. Fortunately somebody had weed whacked around it, and fortunately it was cement at the base, so our main fire station was spared. So I went there just to sort of debrief with the other firefighters and help out as best I could. And one interesting thing that happened was a sheriff's officer drove up. In fact, he and I had been interacting throughout the district. We were sort of comparing notes. And he showed up at 4 o'clock. Actually, I think it was right before 4 o'clock. Anyway, he said, yeah, I was sent up here by Incident Command, and I need to give them a report of structures, you know, destroyed and structures still standing, and I need to give it to them by 1600 hours. And I said, well, you've got 5 minutes. There's no way you're going to be able to drive out and figure that. I said, oh, but by the way, I have a pile of notes here about what houses are still standing, what houses have been destroyed. So he said, oh, thank you. So for better or for worse, we took data, we compiled data from my notes, and we tried to come up with the first rough guess at houses that had been destroyed and houses that were still standing. He had some notes himself, so we were able to correlate our notes and come up with the first set of, you know, actual, factual, on boots on the ground report. Now, it turned out that the actual statistics of homes destroyed exceeded what we were able to compile, because, like I said, we were only able to identify homes that we could see from the road, or in his case, he went down a few driveways. But anyway, it was a first attempt at gathering some real data, and that was sobering enough. I think that was enough to make everybody realize what a crisis situation we were dealing with. So anyway, he was able to report that data back to his command, and I was able to fax him my notes. So my
And Doug, during this time, your family was evacuated to Boulder. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We were evacuated for a week, and by a week I mean 5 days. And it was interesting living out of a suitcase, out of a hotel for a week. Our kids were with very good friends. Each of them was staying with good friends, which was great. They said they loved being with their friends because it took their mind off of the fire and the possible threat. In one case, my daughter was staying with friends who were very, very concerned about their second home, which was in Sunshine. And so actually, there was some anxiety in their household. So it was impossible to get away from the fire that week. We had firefighters, helicopters lumbering overhead. You had fire trucks driving all around Boulder. It was like living under siege for that week. And so as much as we tried to get away from it, I think it was on everybody's minds. So our kids had a pretty good, they were with friends and they enjoyed going to school. The school district was incredibly supportive. The Boulder Valley School District was incredibly supportive. They had an excellent emergency response plan already in place that they were able to execute against. They were able to take care of our kids, provide for all their needs. They were prepared to send individual vehicles to pick up our kids wherever we had been evacuated to make sure they got to school. Fortunately, we were able to drive them, our friends were able to drive them, but the school district put all of these resources at our disposal. They were even going to offer to give our kids vouchers for school lunches that week to make sure they were getting fed regularly, because, you know, we had no refrigerator, we had no food. So that was really, really nice of them. So the school district was great, and they made sure that our kids' needs were being met. Although, ironically, my daughter Ellen pointed out that she would go to school, and my daughter was looking to go to school to get back to some normalcy. But when she would go to school, everybody would ask her, oh, how are you doing? Is everything okay? Did your house burn? And so that was a little bit tough for her, because she was trying to get away from it all and return to some normalcy, whereas everybody else was captivated by this. And we got a strong sense of you know, we had been evacuated from the fire. Everybody else was kind of watching the fire from miles away, so there was some kind of spectacle going on there. But we were greatly appreciative of the great job that the school district did. I want to tell you a little bit about my family's reactions to the fire and to being evacuated. Right after, Monday morning, right after the fire started, and we thought we heard sirens, I actually thought it was my son's video game, because he plays video games with sirens and explosions and things. And my wife pointed out, no, he's doing homework. And it's like, okay, so it's a real siren. So we went and turned the radio scanners on. Our kids' impression was, after Mommy and Daddy had gone down to watch the fire a couple of times, they walked down with us, and they brought the dog. And their recollection was that it was smoky, they could see the smoke. But you know, a wildfire doesn't look necessarily dramatic the way you might think of it in your mind. It's really not flames reaching to the sky. It's really just a pile of smoke. And so to the kids, it's like, okay, I see the smoke, I see some flames, you know, let's go back to the house. It was sort of boring in kind of a dramatic way, I guess. Like, okay. But I asked my kids afterwards what was their impression that day, and they said that Pam and I were fidgeting that day. They said that we were fidgeting a lot and that we were pacing around the house a lot. And I thought that was incredibly observant of them, because that's exactly how I felt. I was just nervous that day. I was nervous and on edge. My son even said that Dad had his firefighter face on, which is this really serious face I get when I'm in the zone. And so the kids were incredibly observant about what their parents were going through at that time. My wife said that she was doing laundry that morning, and she just stripped our bed, and she was listening to the radio, and she heard how serious the fire was. And she said, you know what, I better get some clean sheets back on the bed, because I think we may wind up evacuating this afternoon. Around noon, our good friends the Waltmans evacuated to our house, so that sort of added to the whole spectacle of it. Their husband had called, said, get out now, so they evacuated down to our house, which was still inside of the evacuation perimeter, but it was out of the direct line of fire. So we had them at our house. They don't have their stuff with them. We're trying to get ready to evacuate. The nice thing was, we had an extra pair of hands to help us evacuate, so Mrs. Waltman was able to go around the house with us and help us prepare the house, which was really, really nice. And then eventually, within an hour or two, they left and went to town, and then we followed a few hours later. My other impressions that my kids had was, with all this fire going on, my son Alex, who's 14 and he's a freshman at Boulder High School, he was still concerned about his homework, because he had a really, really tough class that semester. And he was really, really trying to work hard for his teacher. And he was really concerned about his homework for this one class. And so we actually had them do some homework that day. I think the kids were better at that than we were. Once we started evacuating, we had Alex take photos of everything in the house, because we wanted to document as much as possible. And even though we didn't lose personal effects, you know, many people did. And so documenting your various personal effects can be very, very helpful when you're trying to recover after the fire. My daughter also was concerned about her homework, and she did homework while her brother was doing homework. While she was packing, she was thinking, I might not see this again. And so she was processing it, but at the same time, in her heart, she said, I really don't think our house is going to burn. But yet she was kind of visiting that part of her consciousness. My son remembers how orange it was outside. The smoke column was this orange, black, yellow, roiling cloud that was going up and arcing over. So it was blotting out the sun. Everything was orange. It was just positively unreal. My daughter Ellen, as the ash was starting to fall around our house, our daughter Ellen actually thought of the city of Pompeii, and she actually started to think about that. And even though it wasn't a volcano, it was a fire, she was starting to think about the ash falling. And she was actually more concerned about spot fires developing than, you know, lava. She was actually more concerned about the ash and the spot fires than the actual fire itself, which was pretty spot on because it was bone dry. And we're really, really lucky we didn't get any spotting in our neighborhood, because that would have been disastrous. Other recollections our kids have is the Red Cross took great care of us. When we were evacuated, we stayed at a wonderful extended care place that included a wonderful breakfast. But the Red Cross did a great job of setting up at our local YMCA. And so you could stop by and get food. And plus, they served meals 3 times a day. But what my kids remember was, well, a lot of evacuees will tell you, we didn't take enough clothes with us. We didn't take enough socks and underwear. And so it really made an impression on my kids that there was a whole trailer full of, you know, lightly used donated clothing that was clean and folded and ready to go. And it was such a treat for them to be able to go and get a pair of socks or some, you know, kid underwear. I mean, it was just a very, very precious moment that I think just made a big impression on them. They said their friends really, really helped a lot. And I think that's something to bear in mind, that kids, you know, crave that normalcy, and they find that normalcy in their friends. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful support network. Even though going back to school, all of her friends were asking about it, still, you know, it helped them start to get back to normal.
And when were they able to return to their home?
So, yeah, speaking to that, so it was a short week since we had Monday off. And it was funny because every day, Monday I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go to work tomorrow. Tuesday, I did not go to work. I wound up trying to document the fire. I said, okay, I'll go to work tomorrow, Wednesday. Each day I told myself this. It became pretty clear I was in no shape, physically or mentally, to go to work. So I wound up not going to work at all that week. Fortunately, my employer was very, very understanding and very concerned. So that worked out great. The kids went to school the whole week. And then we were able to regroup as a family on Thursday when we were able to move into a larger extended stay room. And so we rejoined as a family on Thursday, and then Friday we were able to return to our home. They let us into our home, but the school buses still weren't running, so they had been walking to school and riding bikes to school with their friends. The dog was staying with us as well, and that was one of the wonderful things about the extended stay facility we were at. Fortunately, Pam had called Tuesday to get a reservation because everything in Boulder filled up, full of evacuees. And fortunately, this place took dogs. They waived the pet fee, so our dog was able to stay with us. And they were so sweet. This one hotel we stayed at even went out and bought bags of dog food, because we didn't evacuate with our dog food. And there we are in this basically hotel room. And so we were able to go to the front desk and fill up our bowl with dog food. You know, it's the little things that just make it, you know, that really help you get through something like that. So that was wonderful. So then we had a weekend at home and just in shock dealing with it. And then Monday, this is a week after the fire started. Monday, the kids went to school. We had to drive them to school because the buses still weren't in operation, and they weren't running the bus routes up through the fire yet. Tuesday, they started rerunning the buses, and the buses ran a partial route. So the bus was able to get as far as our house, but the bus stopped at the intersection of Poor Man Road and Sunshine Canyon Drive, which is about 2.5 miles up Sunshine Canyon. So the bus was able to run that week. And then they opened up that roadblock and they moved the roadblock farther up to Bald Mountain, which is at about 4.5 miles up Sunshine Canyon. And that was right at the edge of the burn perimeter. So the bus was able to go that far. Eventually they started letting the bus ride because once they let people back into the burn area, back into their homes, the bus was able to get up and get those kids. I will tell you, it's been one thing that has made this experience so very sobering is that those first few days, there were hardly any kids on the bus. And the first thing you realize is how many people had been evacuated and how many people hadn't moved back in yet. But what we've come to realize is that many people haven't returned. And in fact, many people may not return. So the school bus is a daily reminder that our lives and our community has just been changed irrevocably forever. And that's been very sobering. We were allowed to return to our house on that Friday morning. And we were right there at the roadblock when it opened, when we got word that it opened. And we were lucky. We had never lost power or phone. So we moved back into our house, and other than a slight smell of smoke and a little bit of ash fall everywhere, we were fine. But the effects, the signs were everywhere. And I remember the first thing I noticed was that night, we really have an expansive view of most of the burn area, all the way from the point of origin, Sugarloaf, Gold Hill, up to Bald Mountain and into Sunshine. We have a pretty panoramic view. And I remember really being struck that night and for subsequent nights, the lack of lights where homes should have been. And it wasn't simply that homes had been destroyed. Power was still out in the burn area. But I just remember thinking, this whole vast community has just been devastated, and it's missing. It's where we partied, it's where we laughed, it's where we cried, it's where we socialized, and it was all turned off, and much of it was gone. And so we lived with that. So we're, even though we didn't lose our house, we had this sort of residual peripheral grief we were going through, largely on behalf of our friends. Many, in the burn area, it was weeks before these folks were allowed back in. Those who still had houses standing, it was a week or two or more before they were allowed back in, before they had power. And once they were allowed back in, of course, they were dealing with a disaster area. And they had to clean their houses out. And I just remember that first day the bus started running. It was a Tuesday after the fire. So it was a week and a day after the fire started. And the bus was running, and I just remembered how few kids, it was almost empty. I think my kids were the only kids on the bus. And it was really sobering. And as they opened up more and more of the burn area, the bus was able to do more and more of its route. And there were hardly any kids on the bus. And I realized some people have lost their homes and they've moved away, and they're not going to be on the bus for a year or more. Or many people who had evacuated and who weren't allowed back in yet and who didn't have power. And so that school bus every morning was just a reminder of how the community had just been devastated. And then at the same time, there we are waiting at the bus stop every morning, and it was a steady stream of disaster recovery vehicles going up the canyon every morning. And at night, they'd come rumbling down. We'd see the disaster recovery crews, the Excel trucks, these armies of Excel trucks would go up in the morning. We'd see these huge, huge dump trucks rumbling up in the morning, and they'd come down full of cleaned out foundations and recovered foundations that had been torn out. So that whole change in the traffic pattern just left such a effect on us, and we watched this evolve. So over the past 6 months, it's been almost exactly 6 months, we've watched those disaster recovery vehicles and removing the foundations and trucks coming down the canyon full of cement. And then we started to see county vehicles going up and other administrative vehicles, and now a few permits have started to be pulled, and so now that when I go down to the bus stop, I'm seeing some cement trucks going up the canyon, to pour cement foundations. So it's like we're starting to see the first signs of rebirth and regrowth to our community. And so that's really, really nourishing, and at the same time, I can't help but think about how many people aren't going to be able to move back in, or it's going to take them months or years to get to a point where they start to pour their foundation. So it's, the traffic at our bus stop is just a perfect metaphor, a perfect reminder for what our community is going through and the really, really long path to recovery that lies ahead.